On my way to assassinate the crown prince, I stumbled upon a beautiful mute. I saved him using my body heat, and after spending countless passionate nights together, I walked away without a trace. Later, the assassination failed. The crown prince took the throne, and I became a prisoner. But the new emperor came to the dungeon at night and said he was here to bring his empress home. When the cell door opened, the mute I hadn't seen in so long clung to my ankle with a hoarse voice. "Ayu, was it fun sleeping with me and then running off?" On the day my mother was buried, snow blanketed the capital. I knelt barefoot in the snow. My legs had turned purple and were rotting from the cold. When the prince regent passed by and saw me, he brought me back to his residence. "You look exactly like your mother," Ji Junha said. As he spoke, his most beloved little daughter was peeking at me from behind the door. Ji Zime, the same age as me, wore a bright yellow jacket with a silk skirt. Spoiled and sweet, she was a charming little beauty. In contrast, I was filthy and covered in blood. There wasn't a patch of unbroken skin on me. My threadbare cotton clothes were full of patches my mother had sewn, and my gaze was like that of a feral wolf pup, untamable. I knew Ji Junha was my birth father. He pretended to pass by that day just to catch a final glimpse of my mother. But in the end, he didn't give her a title, only set up a tombstone with her name and tossed me to the shadow guards of the house to be raised.
Why?
Because my mother had been a famous courtesan in the pleasure quarters. Everyone in the Prince Regent's manor thought my mother and I were filthy. The year both Ji Zime and I turned 15, the age of coming of age for noble girls, the manor was lavishly decorated to hold a grand celebration for the third young lady. Nobles from across the capital came to offer blessings and wish her a bright future. As for me, the shameful, illegitimate daughter, I was summoned to Ji Junha's study. At the tender age of 15, he gave me a command to kill someone. The Crown Prince. The Crown Prince had just turned 17 that year. It was said he was born sickly, and both his literary and martial skills were unremarkable compared to the other princes. His face was pockmarked and terrifying to look at. Even the best doctors in the capital couldn't cure him. So when he was named the heir, there was much dissent in court and among the people. And the loudest voice of opposition came from the Prince Regent. His younger sister, Consort Ji, whom he adored, had given the emperor a son and aspired to become empress, to rule the inner palace. But the emperor favored a lower-born consort, Dai, who had once been an embroidery girl, along with her seemingly useless son. That winter in the capital was especially harsh. Thinking of the crown prince's frail health, the emperor sent him south to the warmer Jiangnan region to escape the cold. Ji Junha thought this was the perfect opportunity for an assassination. He handed me a portrait of the crown prince and an old hairpin with dangling ornaments. "Ji Yu, this is the token of love between your mother and me." Ji Junha, for once, called me by name. "If you succeed and return, I will add your mother's name to the family records and make her my official concubine." I stared at the engraved crane on the hairpin and pictured my mother's stunning face. She had seen countless men in her life, yet at the end, she still waited hopelessly for her crane to return. I looked at Ji Junha and said quietly, "All right." It really was a freezing winter. As I galloped out of the city, snow had already formed a crust on my clothes within the hour. I hated snow. The endless white reminded me of my mother's death and the injustice of this world. The rich feasted behind red gates, while the bones of the frozen poor littered the streets. The wealthy sat by the fire admiring the snow, while the poor couldn't afford warm clothes and died silently in the blizzard. I raced through the snow for hours, from daylight into dusk, until suddenly my horse neighed and came to a halt. I looked down. There, by an overgrown path, lay a blood-soaked sack, as if it held the corpse of an animal. I frowned, annoyed by the bad omen, and was about to circle around when I caught a glimpse of jet-black hair peeking from the sack's opening. A chill ran down my spine. There was a person inside that sack. I dismounted and untied it, reaching in to check for breath. A faint breath touched my fingertips. He was still alive. Relieved, I then hesitated. Should I save him or not? I looked around. The nearest town was still 2 days away by horse. In this endless snow, the only shelter was a crumbling temple with a faint flicker of light. If I left him here, with wounds that severe, he wouldn't survive another 15 minutes in the cold. Just as I was wavering, the dying man turned his head and rubbed his cheek against my palm. Like a little dog. Damn it. I dragged this dog of a man into the temple. The place had long been abandoned. It was dark and run down, filled with cobwebs and ash. I struggled to start a fire, then tore a strip from my clothing and melted snow to wipe the blood off his face. When I finally saw his features, I was stunned. What a breathtakingly beautiful man. Lit by firelight, he was half cradled in my arms. His long hair was disheveled, his eyes closed in exhaustion, lashes fluttering faintly, so delicate it made your heart ache. The most striking detail was the small vermilion mole between his brows. Against his snow-white skin, it was like a red plum blossom falling into the snow. I was mesmerized but also puzzled. Why would someone this beautiful be beaten nearly to death and tossed on the roadside like trash? Just as I was thinking that, the man in my arms suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood. His lips were bluish, and his limbs had gone stiff. When I was little, my mother wandered the streets with me. We did odd jobs at a local clinic, so I recognized it at once. These were signs of impending death by frost. This was bad. I quickly laid him down on the pile of dry grass, pulled open his collar, and despite propriety, began rubbing his body with a damp cloth. But after the time it took an incense stick to burn, the stiffness had not improved. His colorless lips quivered, and then he violently coughed up a second mouthful of black blood. "Hey, wake up." I patted his face. No response. Night had deepened, and the cold was now bone-cutting. I let out a quiet sigh. It seemed there was only one option left. Skin to skin, I would warm him with my body heat. As I turned around to loosen my sash, I couldn't help but scoff at myself. I was supposed to be out here to kill someone, and somehow ended up saving a man along the way. Utterly ridiculous. But what could I do? I had a soft spot for beautiful people in distress. The sight of him brought back memories of those kind-hearted courtesans from my childhood, the ones who fed me sweets in the brothel and met tragic ends despite their kindness. I was so lost in thought, I didn't notice the pale moonlight slipping through the cracks in the high wall, falling across my bare shoulders. Nor did I notice that the dying man had suddenly opened his eyes. Those long, narrow phoenix eyes fluttered open and locked onto me without blinking. Despite being curled up from the cold, this man's body was remarkably built. I shrugged off my outer robe, pulled a quilt from my pack and draped it over him, then slipped under it like a snake, pressing my body tightly against his. I could feel warmth slowly returning to him. I reached out to check his neck, and without thinking, my fingers slid down to his firm abdomen. Ahem, don't get the wrong idea. Even though I knew he couldn't hear me, I still hypocritically muttered, "I'm not taking advantage of your looks, okay? I'm saving your life." I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination, but his lashes trembled even more fiercely. The long night outside was ominous. Fierce winds howled through the snow like some nameless beast. I found it noisy and annoying, so I shifted around until I found a comfortable spot on his body, and fell asleep just like that. When I woke again, I was staring into a pair of pitch-black eyes. Trained from childhood by the shadow guards, my body reacted before my mind did. I instinctively struck at his neck with a knife hand. Just as I was about to make contact, I realized something was wrong and pulled back at the last second, letting my hand fall softly on his skin. He flopped onto me with a small muffled groan. Ugh. Sorry. Just woke up. Wasn't thinking. I rubbed the back of his neck, as an apology. He didn't seem able to move and instead nudged his head into the crook of my neck, as if to say it's fine. He looked even more like a puppy. After a full night's rest, the guy had finally come around and could sit up on his own. Though his complexion was still pale, he looked much better. Out of kindness, I helped fasten his robe. While doing so, I casually brushed my fingers over his pale chest and asked, "Why were you lying by the roadside?" He looked at me, picked up a twig, and wrote on the ground. Don't know. I asked again. What's your name? He wrote. No name. I stared at those 2 words, dumbfounded. You haven't said a single word this whole time. Could it be that you're mute? The little puppy nodded. Strange. Very strange. We'd only spent one night together, but it wasn't hard to tell this man was noble in appearance. His white robe, though stained with blood, was made from fine fabric and stitched with expert craftsmanship. Definitely not something common folk could afford. He didn't look like an abandoned mute. He looked more like a young master who had gone missing from some aristocratic family. So I asked, Do you remember where your home is? I expected him to shake his head again, but instead, he looked down and pulled a wooden token from his robe pocket. It was a smooth redwood pass, engraved with 5 large characters. In Yen Pavilion, Jiangnan. My heart skipped a beat. What were the odds? In Yen Pavilion was the very brothel I was born in. And coincidentally, it was located right next to the Fulling Inn, the place where I planned to carry out the assassination. Who exactly are you? I reached for the dagger at my lower back and asked sharply. Seeing my sudden vigilance, the man's lips pressed into a thin line. He let go of the twig and gently took my hand, writing a single word in my palm. Sold. Sold? I took a breath to calm myself. You mean you were sold by Yen Pavilion as a courtesan? I voiced the guess out loud. His long fingers curled slightly around my wrist. The mute young man lowered his pretty eyes, gazed in, and after a long pause, nodded. I guessed he thought I looked down on him for being lowborn. So I gently squeezed his fingertips, said nothing more, and let the matter rest. But truthfully, in my mind, a dog-blooded drama was already playing out. The capital was full of wealthy ladies, and even more wealthy widows. This little mute was probably a popular courtesan at Yen Pavilion, sold from Jiangnan to the capital for some rich widow to keep for her own amusement. But just as they were about to arrive, the scandal got out. The widow's family hired thugs to beat him half to death and dumped him at the city outskirts. The more I thought about it, the more I pitied him. I looked at him gently and said, Poor thing. Lucky for you. I'm headed to Jiangnan too. I'll take you with me. The little mute seemed dazed for a moment. Then he gazed at me and, after a while, curled his lips into a faint smile. In my palm, he wrote, Okay. As he looked down, his long, soft lashes caught a drifting snowflake. It landed on them, trembled, and then fell. At that moment, I had a strange urge to call out to him, but the words stuck in my throat. He said his name was no name. So I said, From today on, I'll call you a Wu. Wu Ming, a Wu, a Wu. Like the sound a puppy makes. Fitting. I gave a Wu some basic bandaging and rode through the night into town, sending him to the best medical clinic. The roads were bad, and a Wu had lost a lot of blood. The doctor said if we'd arrived any later, we should have been planning a funeral. My face darkened when I heard that. Oddly enough, it was a Wu, lying on the sickbed, who reached out to comfort me. He smoothed out my furrowed brows and wrote in my palm, Don't worry. Lowly names live long lives. I see you figured out that your new name sounds like a dog bark. Maybe it really was the power of that name, because within a few days, a Wu's many injuries had healed significantly. The doctor checked his pulse and exclaimed in wonder. To have suffered such severe injuries and recover this quickly, this old man has never seen the like. This young master must be a martial artist, yes. Since a Wu couldn't speak, the doctor turned to me. I rubbed my forehead, struggling to answer. Sort of. He practices a bit. Who says bedroom skills don't count as martial arts? Once a Wu had fully recovered, I went to the market and bought a carriage. My horse was strong, but carrying both of us was too much in the long run. The night before we set out, a Wu and I were loading up the luggage when a scroll tumbled from the bundle, rolling right to his feet. He picked it up and looked at me, clearly wondering what it was. I glanced at it and fell silent. It was that cursed portrait of the crown prince. Fierce and hideous, the kind of thing you'd hang by the bed to ward off evil spirits. I tossed it aside with disgust. Don't look. That unlucky face belongs to the crown prince. No sooner had I spoken than I saw Awu's expression freeze for a second. What? Did he think I was lying? But then Awu quickly lowered his eyes, meek and obedient. I wouldn't dare. Speaking of the crown prince is not something people like us should do lightly. I scoffed. So what? Everyone is born from a woman's womb, with 2 eyes and a nose. Why should some people be born superior to others? Even if the crown prince stood right in front of me with a blade to my neck, I'd still say, he's just an ugly guy with a face full of pockmarks. My words were bold, outrageous even. But Awu laughed. When he smiled, a soft little hum escaped his throat, like a small animal. His eyes curved into crescents, making that cool vermilion mole between his brows look especially endearing. I stared, completely dazed, and blurted without thinking, Awu, honestly, you're more attractive to me than the crown prince. Awu blinked at me. Like a scoundrel teasing a proper lady, I lifted his chin and sighed dramatically. Between you and the crown prince, I'd choose you. But, I added, I have no plans to marry. If you want to stay with me, you'll have to marry into my family instead. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows across Awu's clear eyes. Something darkened in them. The strokes he traced into my palm grew firmer. Are you serious? I'm serious. I thought I was just teasing the mute little puppy, smiling flirtatiously. I didn't expect that the next morning, as I sat in the carriage adjusting the reins, my ankles suddenly felt cold. It was Awu's fingers. I nearly kicked the dogman out of the carriage, but his grip was surprisingly strong. He held my ankles so firmly I couldn't move, and before I could react, he had tied a red string around it. Dangling from the string were a piece of cold white jade and a silver bell. I scowled. What is this? The early morning light brushed past his loose hair as a breeze lifted the strands. The boy's features were radiant, and he smiled at me like spring sunlight. He wrote, stroke by stroke, my token of love for you. I froze. Then, like I'd been pricked, I curled my leg up to my chest and buried my head. After a while, I spoke sincerely. Awu, I was joking about making you my husband. Please don't take it seriously. Awu only smiled, as if it didn't matter. He wrote, I know. The love token was a joke too. The jade is just a thank you for saving me. Only then did I breathe a sigh of relief. You should have said that earlier. You scared me. When I looked up again, the hazy morning light hit the side of Awu's face like amber, beautiful and unreal. I suddenly felt the urge to tease him again. I pressed my bare foot to his chest, and the bell at my ankle jingled. Hey, I said, a proper lady's feet aren't supposed to be seen by outsiders. Not only did you look, you touched. So, what are you going to do about it? Awu smiled and met my gaze, eyes burning. Though his expression was warm as a spring breeze, it sent a shiver down my spine, like I'd been caught in a predator's sights. This time, his finger brushed across the top of my foot, slowly tracing out words. I'll take responsibility. Whatever you want, I'll do it. I choked. What the hell? I was the one trying to flirt, so why was I the one blushing now? There were still 3 days left before we reached Jiangnan. That night, we stopped by a cold spring in the woods. I leaned back, gazing up at the moon, when something tickled my palm. Looking down, I saw Awu writing. He was asking me why I was going to Jiangnan. I yawned and lazily replied, to kill someone. I want to win a title for my mother. Awu's gaze flickered. He wrote again, asking who I was going to kill. I didn't answer. Even though Awu was mute and couldn't leak secrets, at the end of the day, we were still strangers who'd met by chance. Once we reached Jiangnan, he'd return to Ingyan Pavilion, and I'd reunite with the shadow guards. We'd part ways and forget each other. Thinking of this, I stared at the waning moon and sighed. There are millions of people in the world, each as small as ants. Why did we cross paths? Is it fate? Awu sat beside me. Our shadows overlapped, looking like lovers leaning into each other. He shook his head at that, then began writing again. There were a lot of strokes. I didn't recognize the character right away. I opened my mouth to ask when, A rustle burst from the pitch-dark forest. Before I could react, a black figure dropped from the trees, and a blade flashed toward me. Damn, an ambush. I shoved Awu into the carriage and leapt up with my sword. The attacker was dressed in black, fast and skilled. We clashed for a long while before I found an opening. I dislocated his arms and drove my sword at his vitals. He twisted away just in time. Suddenly, dozens of throwing darts flew at my exposed back from the shadows. That bastard had backup. I switched to a defensive stance, but it was too late. Just as I braced myself for the impact, a shadow flashed in front of me. Awu threw himself in my path, taking the darts straight to the body. The attacker fled into the forest. Under normal circumstances, I'd chase him down to the death. But right now, I had no time to spare. I grabbed Awu by the collar, furious. "Are you an idiot? Why did you run out?" It obviously hurt, but Awu still forced a smile, silently begging me not to frown. My tongue felt bitter. I lowered my head to check his wounds. His neck was long and graceful, like a swan's, but now it was covered in deep gashes. Beneath the skin, something squirmed thread-like and unnatural. I still held a piece of cloth I'd ripped from the assassin, and when I took a closer look, it bore the emblem of the Eastern Palace. My heart dropped. He was sent by the Crown Prince. Had Ji Juanhe's assassination plot been exposed? Had the Crown Prince sent men to silence me? I was still trying to make sense of it all when I felt a searing hot arm wrap around me, curling tight like a vine. I looked down with a cold face, only to meet Awu's eyes, clouded with lust and innocence. Hhuangu. It was Hhuangu, a parasitic aphrodisiac worm. The assassin hadn't coated his weapons in poison, but in goo. My thoughts snapped. Stunned, I was pulled into Awu's arms.
Heat.
A wave of scorching heat swallowed me whole.
No.
Awu, who was always gentle, now moved like a caged beast. He gritted his teeth, using all his willpower to pull away from me. He swept aside the hair clinging to his forehead and stared at me with burning eyes. Then he tore open his robe and walked into the misty, cold spring. I sat up, watching Awu standing in the water, his back full of desolation. He was trying to cool his body down to regain control. He'd just recovered from serious injuries. If this went on, he'd die. I closed my eyes, resigned. Fate really seemed determined to tie me to Awu. In the silent night, my voice rang out clearly. "Awu, come here. I'll help you suppress the goo." He didn't respond, so I called again. "Come here or I won't want you anymore." That finally got a reaction. He turned, pitifully staring at me over his shoulder. I opened my arms, and for the first time in my life, I acted coy. "I'm cold. Hug me." Awu had been standing in the spring too long. His body, cooled from the water, had started burning again, red with heat. He finally walked toward me, each step heavier than the last. His burning palm landed on my ankle, holding it firmly. Though the night was windless, the snow on the pine branches fell in soft, steady bursts. The bell Awu had tied to my ankle rang the whole night through. I was going to die. The tiny carriage was filled with waves of lust, and the light filtering through the curtain no longer distinguished day from night. Enough. I really can't. Are you feeling better now? My voice was so hoarse it was barely audible. What answered me was a sticky kiss that trailed from the tip of my nose to the corner of my lips. The spring light broke open. Awu's long hair was loose, damp with sweat, strands falling across the vermilion mole on his forehead. His cheeks were flushed, and his phoenix eyes stared right into me. He shook his head with a smile. I closed my eyes in despair. Birds scattered in alarm as the carriage rocked through the misty morning. Our fingers were still entwined, refusing to let go. It took us 5 whole days to reach Jiangnan. The carriage stopped and started again, under trees by springs inside temples. Awu's goo poison flared up at random. I hadn't worn my clothes properly in days. I didn't cry when my mother died. I didn't cry when I was bullied by the rich brats at the prince's manor. And now, it turned out I was made to cry by this mute stray I picked up on the road. If this went on, I really would die. So the moment we entered the city, I was practically slapping the horses behind into flames, desperate to return a Wu to Ing Yen Pavilion. 7 years had passed. The people receiving guests at the brothel were no longer the ones I knew. A heavily made-up madam waddled up with a wide smile. "Oh my, what a lovely young miss and gentleman. Here for a good time. You've come to the right place. Our top girl here is the best at." Cough cough. I cut off her inappropriate pitch and pulled out the wooden token. She stared at it confused. Not only did she not recognize the token, she even said she'd never seen a Wu before. "He's not one of your courtesans?" I asked. The madam thought I was joking and burst out laughing. "With that face, if this young master wants to be one of ours, I'm sure we could arrange it." I looked at a Wu. He blinked back at me. "Fine. Time to find their boss." "Where's Hong Nyang?" I asked. Unfortunately, she was out handling business and wouldn't be back for a while. The madam suggested, "Why not come back later? There's a temple fair just outside the city, very lively. You could go release a sky lantern, draw a love charm, something romantic." So, off we went again. Jiangnan was warmer than the capital. Vendors lined the streets, shouting their wares, and the air was thick with the scent of food and firecrackers. Afraid we'd get separated in the crowd, a Wu held my hand tightly, fingers laced with mine. His palm was so warm it felt like holding a kettle. My ears turned red as that incident popped back into my head. I cleared my throat, trying to change the subject. "This is my first temple fair." A Wu smiled softly, as if to say mine too. The lantern light reflected in his pale irises, making them shimmer like water, gentle and luminous. A strange thought suddenly crept into my mind. What if my mother were still alive? What if my father weren't Ji Juanhe? What if I were just a normal girl from a normal family and a Wu weren't mute, weren't a courtesan? If we met like ordinary people, fell in love like ordinary people, would we have had a plain but happy home? Looking up at a Wu's profile, I felt for the first time just how cruel reality was. In this life, there are no what-ifs. The area for releasing sky lanterns was packed. We barely managed to buy 2. I held the brush, unsure what to write. I wanted my mother's soul to rest in peace. I wanted a Wu's goo to be cured soon. I wanted Ji Juanhe to die a miserable death. TSK. I really was greedy. I laughed at myself and turned to complain, only to see a Wu had already finished writing on his lantern. I had made 3 wishes just now, but none of them were for myself. A Wu was the opposite. On his sky lantern, every single word was about me. May my Yu get everything she wishes for and have a joyful life. Something warm and unstoppable surged up inside me. "You sweet thing," I muttered. Blinking away the burn in my eyes, I cupped a Wu's pretty face and teased, "Thank you, little mute." I didn't expect a Wu to be so bold. He suddenly leaned down and kissed me. In the bustling crowd, under the lantern's glow, we kissed in secret. When I was nearly out of breath, I shoved him away. "Are you crazy?" A Wu gently touched my bitten lips, mouthing silently. I couldn't help it. On the way back into town, my face was as red as the candied hawthorn sold by the road. When a Wu reached for my hand, I shyly dodged him. I hadn't expected the crowd to grow so chaotic. Eventually, we really did get separated. Panic hit me. I scanned my surroundings, looking for a Wu, only to be grabbed by the arm. A hand covered my mouth and nose, dragging me into a side alley. Again. The moment it happened, I thought of that assassin who'd used the Hahuan Gu. My fury ignited. I flipped the attacker over my shoulder and slammed him into a pile of junk. "Die, you bastard." What I hadn't expected was for the man who stood up from the rubble, brushing off the dust, to be my senior brother. The Prince Regent's Shadow Guard division was no less skilled than the palace's inner guards. It was my senior brother Pei Shua who had raised me and trained me. We were close in age, practically childhood companions. "Ji Yu," he said coldly. "I didn't expect that after just 7 days apart. Not only have you picked up a wild man, you've gotten quite the temper too." Pei Shuo rubbed his sore neck, his voice sharp and chilly. Wild man. My eyelid twitched. I wanted nothing more than to bury myself. You saw all that? He replied sourly. Saw what? You holding hands at the fair, or the two of you making out behind the lantern stand. My face turned bright red. But then Pei Shuo suddenly snapped, scolding me with undisguised frustration. Ji Jiyu, you've gone too far. You were late arriving in Jiangnan. Do you know how worried Master and I were? We thought you'd been killed by the Crown Prince's men. And what were you doing instead? Flirting with some random man? I lowered my head, ashamed. I'm sorry, senior brother. I'll go see Master and explain everything. But you were ambushed by the Eastern Palace too? Pei Shuo snorted coldly. That Crown Prince is definitely not the useless weakling the rumors make him out to be. Who knows where he got his hands on that Eastern poison strain? Just a drop of its extract is enough to kill instantly. Nearly half of the Shadow Guard squad was wiped out. What? I gasped. You were poisoned? Weren't you?
No.
So, why the hell did I get hit with Huangu? The urge to hunt down and kill that bastard assassin surged in me again, stronger than ever. So, who exactly is that man? Pei Shuo brought up Wu again. I've watched you grow up. This is the first time I've seen you act like this over a man. Just look at those marks on your neck. Aren't you ashamed? My temples throbbed painfully. How was I supposed to explain that I picked up a mute stray on the road and ended up curing Huangu for him? Forget it. Better to say nothing. Seeing my silence, Pei Shuo grew even more upset. You really like him that much? Tell me, have you told him who you really are? Have you talked about the future? His words hit a raw nerve. Of course I'd thought about it. If a Wu ever asked who I was, what would I say? The illegitimate daughter of the Prince Regent? A shadow guard? A traitor about to assassinate the Crown Prince? None of it could be said. Pei Shuo saw my expression darken and grew both angry and soft. Jiyu, cut your losses while you can. I'm saying this for your own good. I lowered my head. Okay. But honestly, I didn't need Pei Shuo to remind me. I knew it better than anyone. A Wu and I, we were from two different worlds. There was no future for us. I found him again at the entrance of Ingyan Pavilion. He stood there under a tree, looking pitiful, like an abandoned puppy. Anyone passing by would feel sorry for him. When he saw me, his expression changed, like a heartbroken wife catching her husband cheating. He lowered his head and sniffed around my neck. Then he asked, "Why do you smell like someone else?" That nose, was he really a dog? While I struggled to defend myself, Hong Yang finally appeared. When she saw me and a Wu standing together, she paused, holding her long-stemmed pipe. Her gaze seemed to pass through us, as if seeing a ghost from the past. She slowly exhaled and sighed. Fate really is a strange thing. She led us to the deepest room on the top floor. The moment we entered, I pushed a Wu down onto the bed. Looping my arms around his neck, I planted kisses, one after another. Don't be mad. That crowd at the market? You misunderstood. A Wu ignored me. So I kissed the tip of his nose, his eyes, his throat, until his hand slipped around my waist. Is it the Gu again? I murmured. A Wu nodded, then rolled over, pinning me beneath him. His slender fingers undid my sash with the care one might show a priceless treasure. I leaned into his ear and whispered, "A Wu, I've given you everything." In the second half of the night, I quietly got up, ignoring the soreness in my limbs, and took out the silver needle Pei Shuo had given me. I pierced the back of a Wu's neck. Black blood oozed out. When I lifted the needle, a slender, wriggling worm clung to the tip. The goo had been drawn out. I tossed the wretched thing into the fire and watched it burn. From that point on, there was nothing left to worry about for a Wu. Before leaving, I rested my chin on the edge of the bed and stared at him for a long time. Those soft but emotionally distant lips, the straight bridge of his nose, and most of all, the vermilion mole between his brows that I loved so much. I leaned down and kissed it gently, not out of desire, but as a quiet blessing. Then I climbed out the window of Ingyan Pavilion and disappeared into the night. Goodbye, little mute. To ensure the Crown Prince's safety, news of his journey south was kept strictly confidential. The Eastern Palace guards disguised themselves as a merchant caravan and booked out the entire Fulling Inn. Security was airtight, and the Crown Prince had the protection of the top 3 bodyguards from the capital. One of them had already been bought off by Ji Juanhe. That night, the Crown Prince's personal attendant would be switched out for one of our men. At the same time, Jiangnan's most famous courtesan would perform a dance for him in the main hall. Of course, that courtesan was me. When the music reached its climax, I would sit coyly in the Crown Prince's lap like a seductive fox spirit and with a sharp hairpin, deliver a fatal strike. The sun dipped low, casting a bloody light across the sky. As I applied makeup before a bronze mirror, Pei Shuo suddenly asked, "Are you still thinking about him?"
No.
I gently smoothed my painted brows, feeling numb. Let this farce end quickly. That night, I stepped into the main hall barefoot, dressed in sheer silk. Silver bells at my ankles chimed softly. On the second floor, behind a beaded curtain, the Crown Prince sat waiting. Everything unfolded exactly as planned, until I danced along the silk ribbon suspended from the ceiling beam. And the silk suddenly snapped. I crashed hard to the ground. At that exact moment, a loud explosion rang out from above. The building trembled violently, and thick smoke poured from the top floor. Someone had set fire to the place. It all happened too fast. Flames spread through the inn with terrifying speed. Within moments, Fulling Inn had become a blazing inferno. In the chaos, I heard the fleeing shadow guards shouting, "Shit, we've been set up." This was all a trap by the Eastern Palace. The prince used us as pawns. And then, Pei Shuo's desperate scream, "Of you! Above you, move!" It was as if I suddenly woke from a dream. The massive main beam above had already been swallowed by flames. It cracked with a deafening snap and came crashing down toward me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the red string on my ankle had broken. It lay 5 steps away, in a patch about to be engulfed by fire. I didn't think. I just leapt. I grabbed the red string. The heat stung my eyes. As the beam fell toward me, my only regret was, "Awoo, I'm sorry. You can't come back for you anymore." In that final moment, a dark figure leapt down from the second floor, strong arms wrapping around my waist.
It was a masked man.
He carried me away from the collapsing beams, kicked aside burning debris without care for the flames latching onto his robes, and threw me into Pei Shuo's arms. "You." My eyes welled up. I wanted to call out to him, but just as I raised my hand, a sharp pain struck the back of my neck. I blacked out. When I woke, everything in the capital had changed. The assassination failed. 3 days ago, the late emperor passed away. The crown prince, Shen Wuqiu, ascended the throne and now held absolute power. His first act as emperor was to launch a full investigation into the Jiangnan assassination attempt. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. Some of the captured shadow guards from that night couldn't hold out under torture and confessed Ji Juanhe's involvement. The entire country soon learned the truth. The Prince Regent and his faction had attempted to seize power and assassinate the crown prince. They were executed. The once all-powerful Ji family collapsed overnight. Even the imperial consort, Ji Juanhe's sister, was implicated and thrown into the cold palace. Every male member of the Ji family over the age of 15 was sentenced to death by hanging. As for me, since I was never listed in the family registry, I was imprisoned with the Shadow Guard squad in the Zijing dungeon, awaiting a mass execution. The dungeon was freezing. I lay motionless on the stone floor, no different from a corpse. Pei Shuo was locked in the cell next to mine, yet still had the mood to joke. Well, I suppose Ji Juanhe finally did one good thing. He never admitted you were his daughter, so at least you won't be executed as part of his family. Starving and freezing, I weakly rolled my eyes. Right, being publicly beheaded in a marketplace is so much more dignified. Pei Shuo chuckled, but in the next second, his smile faded. If I'd known it would end like this, I'd have told you to just elope with that pretty boy. I turned over with effort. Don't mention him. Pei Shua scoffed. Oh, drop the act. You're pining for him so bad it's driving you insane. I ignored him and closed my eyes, and for some reason, that snowy night we spent skin to skin came back to me. Tomorrow was the day of execution. Woo, I'm going to die.
How are you doing now?
Do your wounds still hurt? Has the goo poison recurred? Has anyone bullied you? Are you cold? Do you miss me? I drifted in and out of thought until I heard a loud voice outside the prison door. His Majesty has arrived. The dungeon instantly fell silent. All the guards knelt. The chief jailer stammered nervously, "Why, Your Majesty? Why have you come to the dungeon in person?" A crisp, clear voice responded, "I've come to bring my empress home." My heart clenched violently. In the corner of my vision, I saw a tall figure in a deep blue dragon robe. Shinwuchu? He was nothing like the rumors that he was deformed, disfigured like a ghost. The man before me was tall, elegant, refined. Squeak, my cell door opened.
What?
With the last ounce of strength, I looked up, and the sight was like a dream. I finally saw the new emperor's face clearly. The little mute I hadn't seen in so long bent down and lifted my dying body into his arms, eyes filled with possessive madness. "Ah, you," he whispered hoarsely. "Was it fun, sleeping with me and then running off?" Something snapped in my mind. I only needed to raise my hand to touch that vermilion mole I had dreamed of. But all I could do was lie numbly in Shinwuchu's arms, staring up at him in a daze. The mute was the crown prince. Wu was Shunwuchu, the man I spent countless nights with, the one I was sent to assassinate, was now the emperor of the realm. When I came to, I was soaking in a massive bath. Wu, no. Shinwuchu, the emperor himself, was humming while gently washing the blood from my body. His eyes curved with a smile, clearly in a very good mood. "You, do you remember? The first night we met, you stripped me just like this." I splashed a handful of water at him. Shan Wuchu blinked, still with that same innocent look from before. You're bullying me again." I gritted my teeth. "Who bullied who?" "You dog. Care to explain anything first?" Shun Wuchu laughed so hard his whole body trembled. "You're the only person in this world who dares call me a dog." Then he slipped into the bath and embraced me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "I'm sorry for lying to you. And I missed you. So much." I gripped his fingers tightly, speechless. Even when he pretended to be mute, I'd thought his rare voice was beautiful. Now it murmured against my ear, low, coaxing, intoxicating. Shun Wuchu carried me out of the bath and dried me tenderly. I squirmed under his touch and whispered, "I'm a criminal. You shouldn't treat me like this." "You're not," he said seriously. "You saved my life. That night we first met, I was ambushed by traitors. If it weren't for your kindness, I'd be dead." Half reclining on the bed, I confessed, "Actually, I thought you were a courtesan from Ingyen Pavilion. I even planned to buy your freedom." Shan Wuchu chuckled. "I know. Then it's not too late. Come redeem me now." The sheer curtain fell. The room was heavy with incense. The emperor, ruler of all under heaven, knelt by my legs and reverently kissed my ankle. "Your Majesty begs the Empress's favor." In truth, this game had been set in motion long before Shinwuchu was even born. Back then, chaos ruled the land. When his mother, now the Empress Dowager, dreamed while pregnant with him, it was a nightmare. She saw herself bearing a clever, beautiful son, only for him to be slaughtered by jealous siblings before his first birthday. So she taught him to hide, to play the fool, act plain, become a foil for his elder brothers. Shun Wuchu, with a face like an immortal, hid the heart of a wolf. His path was treacherous. He rarely slept, except when he was beside me. I spent a few days recovering in the palace. On the day Ji Juanhe was executed, I went to see him. He knelt on the ground, hair disheveled, eyes wild, like a madman. When he saw me, he spat, "Ungrateful little whore." Before I could speak, Pei Shua, now a commander of the Imperial Guards, drew his sword and cut out Jeju in his tongue. No disrespect to Her Majesty the Empress. I told Ji Junha. My mother was posthumously honored as Lady Ling Xiao. Her spirit tablet now rests in the royal shrine. Ling Xiao was her favorite flower. You, a disgrace for the ages.
And she?
She'll be remembered forever. Ji Junha, you're truly worthless. I covered my nose with a silk handkerchief. His presence smelled like rot. The things my mother wanted, I would claim them for her. Back at the palace, the seventh prince asked me to watch him practice swordplay. Shun Wuchu came as soon as court adjourned, silently standing behind me like a loyal puppy sensing his mistress was upset. I laughed.
Why?
I'm not crying. His eyes were warm, but only I can make the empress cry. I ignored him and kept watching. One of the prince's sparring partners was surnamed Wen, Shun Wuchu's most trusted guard. As I watched, I realized Wen's moves looked familiar. Not just familiar, I'd fought them before. Suddenly it hit me. That assassin by the cold spring, it was him. I turned, teeth clenched. Shun Wuchu. That damn goo poison that nearly killed me. You sent him to do it. Later, I learned even more. It turned out Shin Wuchu's mother and my own were once like sisters, back before one entered the palace and the other got pregnant with the Prince Regent's child. They had once made a vow, if one bore a son and the other a daughter, their children would one day marry. Ah, you, Shin Wuchu said that night, as I sat sweaty and trembling in his arms. You were already my empress, when you were still in your mother's womb. It was a full moon. I was wrapped in his wide dragon robe, silver bells at my ankle chiming softly. How beautiful, I sighed. Shun Wuchu kissed my temple. Ah, you, do you remember the question you asked me that night by the cold spring? What? His fingertip brushed my palm again, writing a single character. This time, I closed my eyes, letting myself feel each stroke. It was a simple word, and yet not simple at all.
Love.
I remembered. That night under the waning moon, I asked why a Wu and I had met, against all odds, in such a vast world. The moon gave no answer, but my lover did. Because of love. Because of love. The end.